We have a very interesting and pertinent talk this afternoon on regulation, the future of regulation, APAC and beyond. And I will hand over to the speakers to let them introduce themselves.
Hi guys, and thanks for coming along. So we're going to do something a bit different and new with the format today. It's going to be a panel, and I'm going to try both moderating it and participating. And we'll definitely want a bit of audience participation, so we might ask you for a show of hands or to fire in some questions here and there, and feel free. So first, as an introduction, my name's Quinn Perrot. I'm one of the co-founders of Traction Fintech, and we do regulatory trade reporting. Over to you, Sophie.
My name's Sophie Gerber, and I'm also one of the founders of Traction Fintech. I also run a business called Sophie Grace, which is a compliance and legal firm in Australia.
Hi there, my name is Craig Allison. I'm Head of Global Development at FP Markets, which is an Australian CFD and FX broker. We've been around for a while. We've been regulated in Australia by ASIC since 2005, but only in the last few years have we branched out to expand globally, which we are doing currently both in Europe and in other jurisdictions. So that's assume why I've been invited to be on this panel.
Hi, I'm Melody. I work with Sophie's compliance company. I'm a lawyer. We provide compliance and legal service to financial providers in Australia.
Okay, thanks guys. So the first topic we're going to broach is a bit of a global regulatory update. Obviously, you all know it's a bit of a global marketplace. There's also been a lot of regulatory change lately. So we might start with Sophie looking down under at ASIC.
Sure. So ASIC for Forex brokers, probably most people know, has been quite difficult in terms of new licensing. We do actually overnight have some potential movement for one license application, and that would be the first license application probably in about 18 months to be successful in the FX CFD space. Otherwise, we're seeing a lot of sales of licenses at quite high prices. However, there's only a limited supply of those, so it's starting to dry up. What I tend to see now in Australia is that there's still a lot of fear that people amongst brokers that are operating and looking at coming to Australia, that there'll be the introduction of leverage caps like under ESMA. So we wait to see what happens there.
Craig, over to you for FCA and other parts of the world you know about.
Well, FCA, I suppose, is very interesting, given the meeting going on a few miles down the road at Downing Street today. Obviously, the FCA was a big driver behind a lot of the legislation that was passed by ESMA. Given that if Brexit happens, the FCA in Britain may find itself out of the ESMA restrictions, given that there'll be a transition period. It'll be interesting to see whether FCA use that as an opportunity to potentially re-attract clients back to London by perhaps even loosening the leverage restrictions. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. The FCA is publishing a white paper in the next 2 months, which will give us more guidance on that.
And Melody, how about China?
There are quite a few new financial service laws and rules came out in China this year. Basically, the Chinese authorities prohibit foreign brokers to operating in Australia, operating in China, and offering margin product in China. So 2018 has been quite a difficult year for foreign brokers with Chinese nationals as clients.
Okay, I have SciSec as a topic. I recently moved there, so I'll take on that part of the world. One of the interesting things about SciSec is perhaps in the past it probably had a reputation of being a bit of a light license in Europe, and maybe being an easy backdoor to passporting compared to the sort of more prestigious FCA license. I think times have really changed, especially with the new trade reporting regulation. We've actually seen SciSec be one of the most on-the-ball regulators. As in looking at the data, making sure that everyone's reporting, chasing them up, actually asking them to lodge with SciSec, who they're reporting to for their EMEA reporting and their MFIR reporting, so the trade repository and the ARM. We are still seeing new licenses come on board through SciSec, which is quite promising, and especially in these sort of uncertain times of leverage restrictions. And yeah, all in all, it seems to be a good, healthy, regulated environment, and SciSec really seem to be putting effort in, not to put the brakes on the industry, but to keep it clean and efficient and well regulated. So quite applaudable there.
I think, Quinn, just to back you up with that, we're currently getting licensed in SciSec as well, and we've also been looking around into other markets. I think the general feeling is the noose is really tightening. The cost of regulation are going up, capital requirements are high, the legal fees and the cost of doing everything are so prohibitively expensive now and take so much time that I think this is no longer a fly-by-night thing you can do on the cuff. You have to plan yourself well in advance and make sure you have all the necessary firepower to be able to carry it through. It's no longer just to put my flag in the jurisdiction and then away we go.
Just a couple of other jurisdictions and countries to note. So these are G20 countries that Traction is looking at because they will eventually have obligations for at least OTC derivatives reporting, very similar to EMEA. So South Africa seems to be a one that a lot of brokers and trading is going through South Africa at the moment. It's a very light licensing regime. Technically, they should have transaction reporting because they're part of the G20, but that's coming soon. Singapore's slowly moving into the legislation. Hong Kong, and we've recently been, Sophie's actually been to Korea looking at legislation there around trade reporting. And Canada, we will be launching a product for soon, which Canada seems to move to its own tune, but also have a very strong margin FX and CFD markets.
Just another one as well, but funny that you mentioned it because given you're a New Zealander, but New Zealand is an interesting one. We've been looking closely there, and the intelligence we have, obviously they're quite fiercely independent. They're very similar to Australia.
We all are.
Very similar to Australia in location, but also fiercely proud of having their own regulation aimed at their own citizens. And we've actually heard that there's very high levels of rejection in the last year from FMA.
They've been difficult since the start. We did some applications for people in New Zealand when it started. I think it was about 2013, and certainly they're not as restrained and politically correct in the way that they respond to people as, say, ASIC or the FCA are. They just say what they feel, which is nice, but it can be a little bit offensive. So, yeah, be careful if you're going to go to New Zealand.
Okay, so moving on to our next topic here is cost of compliance per jurisdiction. Obviously, this can vary widely based on your size of operation, but I'll just get some feedback from Sophie to start with on that one, especially on ASIC.
Yeah, so in ASIC, they don't have a specific requirement like in, say, the FCA or SciSec, where you have to have a CF specifically nominated. But if you had someone like ASIC come in, they would ask who has responsibility for the compliance function, and they're starting to want to see more of a dedicated resource. So there have been people in the past who've been operating on quite a low level of staffing in Australia, and over the years ASIC's been pushing back. So you're going to be looking at least sort of one head count, I think is a realistic number in Australia. Did you want to interject again?
No, Sophie.
Thanks, Craig. I'll keep going. I'll finish it there. Call it one head count.
And Craig, I know that you've been quite instrumental in FP Market's new SciSec application. So, want to share any experiences there?
Yeah, I mean, both points have been touched on before, but I think given some bad experiences SciSec may have had and a perception of their ability to enforce, they're almost overcompensating by being incredibly stringent, which is obviously a good thing. And the other thing, again, I mentioned is really the cost of doing it. And you could go down to any of the law firms here and ask them how much it would cost for you to become regulated in Cyprus and then give you a number. But it's not really about the legal cost only about the legal costs and the accounting costs. It's about everything else, and the time period it actually takes the non-executive directors having a premises. And so I think we really have to take it very carefully, take things very seriously before you embark on that path.
Do you think, on a comparison basis, compared to perhaps the FCA and ASIC, just from your knowledge, do you think it would be the same or a bit cheaper or more expensive?
Well, I'm not sure ASIC are accepting new... Sophie, I think, up to you.
As I said before, there is one application which will probably come through in the next couple of weeks that would have been about 2 years and 3 months. So if you're effectively having to have someone on hold for that amount of time, that's just a hugely expensive exercise. So yes, I think you'd have to say that SciSec and FCA are cheaper from that perspective in terms of getting started, because unless you're going to send these people that you've hired out to work while they're doing nothing, waiting for an application, it's a sunk cost.
Okay, moving along to our next topic, leverage restrictions 3 months in, and whether it will spread further afield. So did anyone in the room know that ESMA had restricted leverage on Forex and CFDs? Obviously, huge issue. It's had a big impact on the markets. I think from what we've seen and the articles we've seen in Finance Magnates, most companies have lost about a third of their volume. And yeah, we're just going to all share our experiences about that topic, and especially whether they're here to stay, and whether it will spread further afield. And one of the things I wanted to ask is, just from the audience, please participate. Who thinks that ESMA will turn around and make these permanent? Can I have a show of hands? Well, how about have a show of hands who thinks they won't, and who thinks we will go back to 100 to 1 or 400 to 1? Anyone think that? Okay, so pretty much consensus that leverage restrictions are here to stay in Europe. So perhaps over to you, Sophie. What's your view on Australia and further afield?
I think Australia was looking really likely until the Royal Commission happened, and then the misconduct in other sectors of the finance industry have become a lot more prominent in the media. So I think, luckily for this industry, the Royal Commission happened. For, say, the banking industry in Australia, if you've been following it, it's been a very difficult time. So I think we'll get there eventually on leverage, but it's probably like three to 4 years out at this point.
Yeah, I think it's inevitable that Australia will follow suit in some respect. We're monitoring the situation closely. I think it's very important to monitor the results of the ESMA legislation, whether or not you think it's been. What does good look like? I mean, the fact that a lot of people are still trading, they're just trading in unregulated jurisdictions. So I think they need to look very closely at ESMA and the actual effect it's had, and consult heavily with the industry to make sure that the well-intended legislation has the effects that it intended.
Is that what politicians do?
Yeah, so very interesting times. Obviously, Australia's definitely benefited from what's happened in Europe. They still technically have unlimited leverage, and it's still a highly respected Tier 1 jurisdiction. As Sophie said before, getting new ASIC licenses has always been very hard, but we've seen leverage restrictions add to the demand to buy existing ones. And just to add to the globalisation of it is, if you're familiar with IOSCO, it's part of the G20, so most of the G20 nations, IOSCO recommendations go to them, and that's where they want harmonisation across leverage, so they don't really want to see any outliers. So I think one day we will have effectively all the primary G20 jurisdictions have the same leverage, but whether these things can take a long time, whether that's in 2 years or 10 years is yet to be seen. So moving along to a very big part of the market still for Forex and CFDs is China. Now, any of us who've been dealing in the financial markets for a long time know that things are always changing there, but it's an attractive market. So I might go over to Melody to talk a bit more about regulation in China.
So generally speaking, the Chinese authorities have been cracking down on foreign brokers operating in China offering margin products. We have seen a few foreign brokers close down their representative office in China this year. In terms of Australian brokers, we have experienced seeing people have payment issues, and this payment issue has putting a lot of pressure on brokers to become more capitalized to comply with the client money rules. So payment issue is still one of the big topics and one of the big problems that broker needs to resolve to keep their Chinese clients.
Okay. Anyone else want to add to China? No? Okay. Thanks, Melody. So the next topic we had is social regulation part of the future, and we'll sort of talk a bit more about that, and I think you'll understand what we mean by social regulation. So with the internet, again, being a global marketplace, people can access it from anywhere. There's nothing physically stopping a client from anywhere in the world effectively signing up with another broker, right? But regulations generally only cover one country, or in the case of ESMA, covering all of Europe. So one of the questions I want to ask Craig, coming from a broker, why do offshore clients choose FP markets in Australia, for instance? Because obviously the ASIC regulation is an Australian firm, but someone from Southeast Asia or anywhere else in the world, what do you think brings them to you guys as a choice?
I think firstly look at our regulation with ASIC, which is probably the strongest regulation in the world. Secondly, a company like ours, been around for 15 years, got a flawless reputation online in terms of reviews. Also, if you're a trader, your most important thing for you is the tightness of the spreads. I think we'd rate very competitively with our competitors on that front. And also in execution, speed and client service, which is where we rank highly for companies like Investment Trends in Australia for the past 5 years. So I think they look quite strongly to Australia in general as a financial centre that they can believe in.
And when I think you hit the nail on the head there with talking about reviews. Do you think that the reviews or the regulation puts you in better stead?
Well, I think the regulation is the flag on which you can base your reputation. Obviously, reviews arise as a result of good service and good product, so the two are hand in hand. Obviously, if you look at the way that it's going with Trustpilot and these rating mechanisms are increasingly important with millennials and the new generation in terms of gauging what's good and what's not.
Sophie, dealing with regulators a bit more than the rest of us, perhaps. Do you think the regulators take into account rating sites or ever read this kind of stuff or consider it?
They read it and they consider it. Whether they admit to that, I think, is a different thing. So I don't think you could say you're going to get an email necessarily from a regulator about what's said on Trustpilot or Google reviews, etc. But if they start seeing enough noise, it's generally going to lead to them being contacted either by the ombudsman, so like the Financial Ombudsman Service equivalent from the FCA. We have one in Australia. Those types of quasi-regulators do send through reporting to ASIC, and then they act on that, and we definitely see that happen. So it does have some sort of impact eventually.
Okay, and Melody, in China, what sort of rankings or ratings or review sites would generally be used from China to find an international broker?
Yeah, so there are some local media companies such as FX110 and FXI. Some of these media companies are exhibiting today as well. In Australia, we have been approached by these media companies and asking questions about specific brokers in Australia. We have also seen these media companies establishing their office in Australia to have more knowledge about the Australian regulations currently.
Okay. And look, just to add to that, social regulation is sort of, I guess, something for me, a bit of a prediction of seeing the industry move in that direction. And yeah, the real foundation for regulation is to protect the client who's trading with a broker. As a client, how do you want to be protected? Basically, you want to know that you're getting fair execution, and you want to know you can get your money out. Two pretty basic things. And regulators don't perhaps do the best job of ensuring that in a very fast and timely manner. Whereas we've seen a lot of other businesses move to the ratings or social regulation model. So examples there, you know, a taxi's moving to Uber. So the taxi system of quality was the taxi driver and the taxi company was regulated. If they did something wrong, they got in trouble and they lost their taxi license. The Uber system came in, and that was almost instant. If the taxi was dirty or took the wrong route consistently, they get very bad rankings, and automatically no one's going to choose them, right? So same kind of thing with like an Amazon marketplace or eBay, right? When you buy something, you don't really care the individual seller who's selling it to you, but you look at the ratings. And you know, if they're selling faulty products or you know, making false claims, very quickly their rankings are going to go down to nothing. They're not going to be displayed, and you're not going to buy off them. So will we see that happen with the financial markets, and see regulation really taking a back step for what clients are choosing, and they all just base it on independent rankings? Interestingly, when I did some research for this panel, two of the biggest brokers that I know quite prominently displayed Trustpilot ratings and had a lot of ratings on there. And I don't know whether they got that because they were successful or they got successful because they did that. So interesting thing to note. So moving on to our last topic, which we will get to and then perhaps take some questions. So quasi-regulators. So what we mean by quasi-regulators is a lot of stuff that's really come to the forefront in the last year, which has been a year of a lot of change, is we've seen Mastercard and Google start to act like regulators and start to, you know, tell you what you can and can't do based on your license and where you're from. So I just wanted to ask a question from the audience, that how severely have these changes actually affected you, with potentially Mastercard blocking your payments or Google blocking your ads in other jurisdictions? And you know, I might ask for a show of hands. Would anyone say this has been more damaging or more challenging than MiFID II? Okay, so that's no to that one. That's good, but it's certainly been significant, right? Yeah. Okay.
And Apple blocking apps as well. So we got approached by someone who had a proprietary app rather than, say, the MetaQuotes app. So Apple was doing the same thing as Google and Mastercard, and blocking their app unless they provide a legal opinion in each country. So it certainly pointed the way that MetaQuotes is a good option from that perspective, because they seem to handle that issue themselves with Apple, rather than you building your own app and then having to have a discussion with Apple about every country you want to sell your app in.
Yeah, I was sitting with our marketing team last week, and just for those you don't know, I think Google and Facebook, you are technically only allowed to put adverts out in jurisdictions where you're regulated. We regularly have Facebook ads and Google ads disapproved, even in markets where we are regulated, like Australia. Now, obviously, the move to regulation is all well and good, but for me, Google, Facebook have as much place in regulation of FX as they do in election winning in America, i.e. none. This needs to be done by the right people. And you know, although the step to regulation of some sort is a good thing, and it is squeezing out unregulated brokers, it has to be done properly, and that's why hopefully IOSCO and some of these steps are taken by the scruff of the neck.
It's kind of like having a vigilante police force, right? Yeah,
it's a bit like Team America, sort of.
Melody, how about in China? Like, do you know of any sort of similar practices with internet service providers or other third-party companies that are effectively trying to take that space of the regulator and come in and decide what's okay and what's not?
Yeah, so we have a widely used search engine called Baidu. Certain words such as binary options in Chinese is also blocked on that search engine. And in terms of payment, it's very difficult to use credit card to deposit and withdrawals with foreign brokers. I guess it's similar to Mastercard. That's what's happening in China.
Do you know if WeChat's doing any blocking?
I believe, my understanding is it's very difficult for WeChat to deposit money directly to foreign brokers. A lot of people, they try to do other ways, such as depositing as e-commerce for the usage of the money, but not for foreign brokers.
So interesting stuff there. Again, to echo some of Craig's comments, I recently looked through Traction's AdWords account and found that we were being blocked for highly speculative regulated products. Oh, what's going on here? And in one of our ads, we said EMEA and MFIA reporting automatic integration to MT4. And they blocked our ad for that. And we had another one, trade reporting for Forex and CFD brokers, and it was also blocked. So again, you know, trying to do the job of a regulator without having the knowledge of a regulator, or, you know, I guess being as careful as a regulator should be, can have some drastic unintended events. I'd never thought we would get blocked for anything.
Also throw in Mastercard and Skrill. We've been told by Skrill that as of next month we can't payments between Australia and Europe. I mean, this is hugely disruptive actions by large corporate companies.
Well, it's disruptive, and they have no right to do it, in my view. I mean, that they've made a value judgment that they don't have the right to make. I'd be interested to see if my bank started making value judgments about what I spend my money on. I might appreciate it, actually. I might have a lot more money, but they have no right to tell me not to shop in a particular place if that's what I want to do. So I find it very concerning what these companies are doing.
And I just wanted to ask one question of the audience there. Is there any other service provider that we've missed that's effectively tried to play that role of a regulator and denied providing you a product or service because of the way you're using your license? Any examples from the audience? No. Okay. So we have about 3 minutes left before we're scheduled to finish up. So do we have any questions from the audience? And we'll take a question on anything related to regulation around the world. So pretty broad.
Matt, do you have a question? Great. Damon? Sure? Lincoln. All right, I've run out of names. Come on, guys.
Okay, well, if you have no questions, I assume our panel was so informative that we've answered anything you possibly... here we go. I had a big think about that one yesterday. If I was a broker and I was brave, I would go and talk to the FCA and say, look, you're regulating me. You know, my revenues and subscription fees or whatever are paying for you to do your job. You should also be fighting for me. Why are you letting these other companies try and come in and tread on your turf? So I would actually ask the FCA to go and tell Google and Mastercard that that's really not their area, and to leave that to the FCA.
But, I mean, Mastercard and Google aren't doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. They must be doing this at the behest of the regulators, because with the quid pro quo under the assumption that down the line they will get market share or something. Because they're not. Why would Google want to, or why would Mastercard want to less clients to sign up through their payment gateway?
Has anyone asked? Has anyone actually broached this with the regulators? So it's risk minimisation from within, right?
There's no connection with chargebacks or anything like that?
Look, I mean, I think, yeah, it's a little bit political, and sometimes they see it's an easy target where they can look like they're the good guys, and, you know, yeah, they're being very conservative about their business. So look, that's about all we have time for today. Thank you very much to Sophie, Craig, and Melody, and Quinn, and thank you to the audience.